All right, guys. So I'm doing plyometric programming and rehab. So kind of my main objective with this, when I was talking to you guys, just provide a lot of examples of plyometric progressions, regressions, different kind of programming examples you can use for rehab. So a little bit of history. Does anyone know Yuri Verkhoshansky? I know Lou might, but he is the father of plyometrics. Back in the 60s, he's a Russian guy, and he kind of created the shock method. And then Fred Willett, a Purdue women's track coach, he kind of learned from Verkhoshansky, and he called it plyometrics around 1975. Dr. Mel Siff worked closely with Verkhoshansky. They created this book called Super Training. His kind of definition for a plyometric is a mechanical shock stimulation that forces the muscles to produce as much tension as rapidly as possible. So it's a quick contraction that's preceded by a relaxed state. So this was supposed to be an animation slide, but one of his first experiments is he had an athlete jump straight from the ground, then he had him perform a counter movement jump, then he had him perform a drop jump, and he kind of found from the drop jump, they could jump higher than they could just doing it straight from the squat. This kind of made him start thinking, why is that? And it's because of the stretch shortening cycle. So you guys know what this is. I'm going to be quick with this. The phases is eccentric, the amortization phase, or just kind of that isometric bottom phase, and then the concentric. So in the eccentric of the stretch shortening cycle, three of the kind of things you can change with this, if you want to make it harder or easier, is the magnitude of the stretch, the rate of the stretch, and the duration of the stretch. So if you have a quicker or a higher magnitude, a quicker rate, a shorter duration, it's going to make the stretch reflex more powerful. And this stretch reflex kind of creates something called potentiation. I'm going to talk a little bit about potentiation later, but it's pretty much an increase in cross bridges attached and a decrease in cross bridges detached. So this is kind of one of the theories is why the stretch creates that stronger concentric action. Next is the amortization phase, or that isometric bottom position. So it's the delay between the negative work to creating that force. The main thing to know about this is the less amortization you have, the quicker you are, the more power, the more height, the more energy that will come out of the stretch shortening cycle. And if you have too long or a prolonged contact time, the intensity might be too high for your athlete, or the transition just might not be continuous. They might not know to be quick between the stretch and the release. And then the concentric. So this is kind of your payoff phase. So with a plyometric, you create kind of that greatest force during the concentric power production phase. And if you guys have seen this before, the concentric has the lowest amount of force than the eccentric. So that's why the pre-stretch and the amortization phases are critical for the optimal power development when you do a plyometric, just because the concentric is kind of the weakest of the three. So you need that quick eccentric to blast back up. So just a quick thing about muscle fibers. So when you do a plyometric, a type 2 muscle fiber is primarily going to be used. One study by Filippo et al. Is they did a single bout of a plyometric exercise, and they found that 86% of the type 2 muscle fibers were damaged versus only 20% of slow twitch fibers. And this is also kind of why volume matters. If you guys remember, type 2 fibers are high fatiguing, so you can't do hundreds of these, or the athlete's just not going to get any more benefit out of them. And then these two articles kind of did rotator cuff biopsy, and they showed that the rotator cuff is 55 to 60% type 2. So doing plyometrics with rotator cuffs, especially in pitchers, is important. And when they did biopsies on injured rotator cuffs, they found that the type 2 fibers are the ones mostly injured. So some of the ways to recruit the type 2 fibers is 70 to 80% intensity, or a max intensity effort. You can use E-stim to kind of recruit the type 2, and then fast movement patterns like plyometrics. So that was a quick little background. Let's talk about plyometrics and rehab. The NSCA kind of says that carefully applied plyometrics, it's not any more harmful than any other type of exercise if you do it right. In terms of guidelines for entry, every article kind of said different things, and there's not really any national guidelines for when you should begin plyometrics. Some previous ideas, these kind of been debunked, but people used to think you had to do a squat that's 1.5 to 2.5 times your body weight, or squat 60% of your body weight 5 times within 5 seconds, or do 5 hand clap push-ups. This is kind of a outdated way to think about it, because how many athletes are going to be able to squat twice their body weight, especially if they're in high school? But the main thing to think about when you're trying to enter someone into plyometrics is, can they tolerate this level of loading? So can they tolerate moderate loading during traditional strengthening? Can they perform functional movement patterns with proper form? Do they have the fundamental strength needed in order to jump? And can they do it without any apprehension, pain, or fusion? And this is out of one article that talked about plyometrics in rehab. Their kind of methods were they should not have any pain, full range of motion, no swelling, balance, proper muscle strength and endurance. And they also talked about the single leg half squat. I kind of think this is one of the most important things that they addressed. You should be able to do at least a half squat with proper form. And if you've ever done a single leg squat test, that's just where you do max single leg squats on each leg from a chair, from a plinth. Some articles say to like return to sport, you have to do 22 on each side as kind of the cutoff zone. But for plyometrics, they should be able to do at least a few of them and do proper single leg half squats. Again, some more contraindications: any increases in pain, increases in inflammation, any acute or subacute injuries, any joint stability, and they should have the foundational strength and training, and they should not be fearful at all. So in the packets, I printed out a couple fear psychological scales for you, kind of in the back. So even though they might have the strength, they might not be ready psychologically. So these scales, the tempo scale, like kinesiophobia, psychological readiness, can kind of test to see where your athlete is. The percent confidence, just asking them how confident they are with jumping or returning back to sport, is super important. You don't want them to be afraid to jump or to go back to sport. So in terms of programming, programming regular athletes, not in the rehab sense, they kind of recommend low volume, 3 to 6 sets of 2 to 5 reps. So it's very low volume, and it should be 80 to 100% max effort. Again, low frequency, maybe 2 to 3 sessions per week, good recovery, and being very specific with your motions, your velocities, your loads, and kind of metabolic demands of your sport. But that is with a regular athlete. In rehab, it's not so black and white. So a lot of people talk about, if you're beginning, you should do 80 to 100 reps, 120 contacts if you're an intermediate, 120 to 140 if you're advanced. That doesn't really apply in the rehab setting. One thing to think about, if you're with an athlete, they're still playing their sport even though they're coming to see you. Say they're a volleyball player, they might jump 1,000 times a week. So do they really need more jumping in the clinic? You should still assess the jumping in the clinic, but you might not have to do a full plyometric workout. They should be able to demonstrate tolerance of low intensity and high volume before doing the high intensity movements. And progression of the volume should only occur when technique is maintained. And one thing to think about is, do they need plyometrics or do they need strength and conditioning? So again, who needs plyometrics? Something to think about in the clinic is, do they really need to do a full plyometrics workout, or do they just need to develop their strength? Some people I think that do need plyometrics are athletes, kids returning to sport, runners, any high activity recreational athletes or adults. And there might be others, but those are the 3 main I was thinking about. So I found these 4 articles that talked about plyometrics versus strength, and all of them pretty much said that weightlifting and plyometrics are both equally effective at improving jump height. And one thing to think about is weightlifting can improve jump height, and it can also improve strength, versus plyometrics can just kind of improve that jump height. But in terms of if you're trying to get max jump height, they're both kind of equal. And another thing to think about is change of direction. So depending on the change of direction, it's a very quick movement, under a second. and you kind of have to think about the magnitude of the distance, the speed, and the direction. So a football player, they're running at max speed when they have to change direction, versus a volleyball player might be standstill and they have to do a quick change of direction backwards. So it's just kind of some things to think about. And this article kind of broke it down into if a change of direction is more velocity-based or force-based. So if you do a change of direction between 0 and 90 degrees, they're calling that more velocity-based change of direction, versus if you cut back more than 90 degrees, they're calling that more of a strength-based change of direction. And in the article, they're saying that strength training is good for the strength change of direction, so the 90 to 180. They said that plyometric is good for strength and velocity-based change of directions, and then sprint training is better for velocity-based change of directions. Different tests, I just put these in here just so if you wanted to test them, you can do a 5:05 where they run 10 meters, 5 meters, change of direction 5 meters, 5:10:5 where they go 5:10:5, and then the t-test as well. And I put these in here just for examples of change of direction drills, if you ever want them. For instance, if you want to do like a t-test, there's multiple different drills you can do with them, different angles you can put them through. And then just with 5 cones, there's just 12 different change of direction drills you can run your athletes through, just to give you more examples of change of direction drills you can use. One thing you can also do is something called a post-activation potentiation. This is kind of the phenomenon by which the force exerted by a muscle is increased due to its previous contraction. Kind of like what I was talking about with the eccentric, can kind of increase that potentiation for the stretch shortening cycle. So pretty much if you wanted to program these, you can do a 40 rep strength exercise, 85% of your 1 rep max. You can do an isometric hold. You can do a slow eccentric, and then rest 0 to 5 minutes, and then do a plyometric exercise with a similar movement pattern. So some examples of that. The first exercise you could do is a single leg press, a walking lunge, or a dumbbell step up. Rest 0 to 5 minutes, and then go straight into a single leg vertical jump, split jump, or a single leg counter movement jump. So there's kind of 3 examples for single leg jumps. A couple more examples I put in there for you. If you want to do more squat focus, you could do a back squat with a box jump, bench press with the plyometric push-up, a deadlift with a kettlebell swing, an overhead press with a wall ball. You can do a sled push with a sprint. One way you can kind of think about this, it's pretty much a drop set or a superset. You're just working those similar movement patterns, doing a strength-based first and then a plyometric-based after. A couple isometrics you can do with it is a rack pull, kind of a bottom squat isometric. You can do a calf raise isometric. You can also do a Bulgarian isometric, doing kind of a max effort isometric and then going straight into a plyometric exercise. So, some more progressions. This is a chart I found on Verkhoshansky's website. I just thought it was interesting, so I want to share it with you guys. Kind of the bottom level they had people doing was bounds and jumps without weights. Then they went into kind of barbell exercises, and then they went into consecutive barbell jumps, where you're jumping with just the barbell on your back repeatedly. Then they went into a kettlebell squat jump, so getting a little bit lower, a little bit more weight. And then they went into counter movement barbell jumps. And then the last thing, the most intense training stimulus they had is high depth jumps. And that's kind of what he was thinking of when he was doing the shock method type workouts. And then in terms of regressing, remember we can change these 3 things with the eccentric, so the magnitude of the stretch, the rate of the stretch, and the duration of the stretch. So say someone was having trouble doing a lunge jump, you can decrease the magnitude, just do a smaller lunge jump. You can also decrease the rate and just doing a lunge kind of with an eccentric focus, making like a slow eccentric contraction. In terms of unloaded versus loaded plyometrics, some examples of unloaded plyometrics to start people out with, you can get them in the pool. You can get them holding onto a band above them and jumping that can kind of unweight them. You can also do against the wall switches where you're just switching your feet back and forth. And you can also load a plyometric. So you can do a trap bar tall to shorts, essentially where you're just holding it and you have to catch it on the way down. You can have them hold a weight doing single leg jumps. You can also have bands pulling them straight down, pulling them laterally forward or back. And then another way you can kind of progress plyometrics, you can kind of go first landing and shock absorption into concentric, into counter movement jumps, into repeated jumps. So I just kind of brainstormed a bunch of different exercises for you. A tall to short, that's just essentially going from your toes and then just focusing on the landing, up from your toes landing. And then a quick squat drops and single leg quick squats. Those are very similar where you just have a weight and you're just in a quick squat, catching yourself from the bottom. In terms of concentric, box jumps is one of the best. If you just want to do the concentric because you're landing on the box, you don't have to worry about the shock absorption coming back down. And an example progression could be doing tall to shorts, followed by a box jump, followed by a jump from a chair into a counter movement jump side to side, into kind of repeated hurdle jumps, repeated jumps onto a plate and back down. And then another thing you can do is exercises where you're focusing on sticking the landing. So when landing, you kind of maintain that landing position for 3 to 5 seconds. It can help prevent any compensatory movements, ensure the athlete is ready for the next rep without doing any relying on momentum. So you can do it over each hurdle, just landing the jump 3 to 5 seconds and then jumping over again. You can do it onto a box where they have to stick the landing on the box and stick the landing off of the box. Another way you can kind of progress or regress is thinking about it with unilateral, bilateral, symmetric, bilateral, asymmetric, and bilateral with timing offset. So if you look kind of in the back of the packet, there's a huge chart that has a bunch of exercises. It's from this study on ACL repairs by Buckworth. So yes, this one. That's also where this chart is from, where they kind of broke things into this unilateral, bilateral, symmetric, asymmetric, and offset. Some examples of that is unilateral jumps, a bilateral squat jump, a lunge jump, and you can also do the offset timing where you jump up and then land with the other foot on a box. Another way you can think about it is going from sagittal to frontal to transverse. So some examples of a sagittal-based exercise, explosive step-ups, or a lunge catch. You can do hurdle jumps and then counter movement jumps as well. Some progressions with frontal-based exercise. You can do skater jumps. You can do side-to-side pogos with band assisted. Those are kind of some baseline things. Then you can do it off a box. So I set that one up over here if you guys want to see. So you can do kind of jump off and then jump onto the box and then go back and forth. Just kind of getting them used to different heights and getting them used to more lateral movements. And that's kind of the same thing you see here, just onto the ground, forward and back. And then in terms of the transverse plane, you can do side-to-side med ball throws, 180 jumps, a 90-degree jump. You can do kind of a lunge 180 or a 180 jump where you touch the floor. And then you can do kind of counter movement jumps with the transverse plane too. So you can jump off a box and then jump back facing the other way or going sideways, like a 90-degree box jump. And then something else you can kind of think about is going from strength and plyometrics. One missing piece you could use is a power-based exercise. So power training is kind of focusing on the ability to overcome the resistance in the shortest time period. So you would use a lighter load and just performing it at a very fast contraction velocity. An example of this is sorry, I forgot about that picture I put in there, is a tempo box squat. So you can do a 5-second eccentric into an explosive 1-second concentric. Just working on that fast contraction rate. If they can't tolerate pliers, they might be able to tolerate any workout like that, an exercise like that. And last but not least, you can do reactive plyometrics. So some examples of that, you can do color changing hops where they have full colors all around them, and then kind of a laptop in front of them that changes colors, and then just have to jump and kind of react to the color that they did. You can also do lunging pushes where they're going from a lunge, you just kind of push them. Banded jump sideways, they have to react to the band pull. You can do yoga ball pushes with your athletes. They have to jump and you just kind of push them different directions. They have to react, different landing. You can also do it where you pull away the yoga ball and they have to react and catch themselves. You can do it just with your hand as well. You can also do drills where they're holding onto a stick. Say they're jumping up and down from the plate, and you can offset them with the stick. You can do reactive lateral box jumps. So when they jump down, you say right or left, and they have to react and jump to the right or jump to the left. And I know we don't have any blaze pods, but they're also good where you have to react to the color, jump certain ways. You can do the same thing with cones. So they can be doing repeated jumps. You call out a color, they have to jump to the cone, jump back. You can do it with a ball drop. So you throw a ball in the air, they have to run to it, grab it, and then do a lateral shuffle. And they can kind of go around the worlds onto a foam pad where they kind of have to react to the different surface. And this is a study that kind of goes over some neurocognitive and reactive exercises for ACL reconstruction. I kind of threw this in there if you want to read it. It's pretty good. It gives you a bunch of tests you can do, different reactions you can try. So, kind of in conclusion, the three things you can change about the stretch shortening cycle are the magnitude, the rate, and the duration. They shouldn't have any apprehension, pain, or fusion with any plyometric training. It should be combined with strength training. I never think you should never do plyometric training alone. It should always be in conjunction with strength training, change of direction and balance. You should go from low intensity, high volume to high intensity, low volume. You should work all the planes, work reactivity, and just make it fun, chaotic, and challenging. There. And then those are my references. Cool. Thanks. Any questions?